Well, this is our finale, and so I just wanted to let everyone be aware that we are recording this session. And if you do not want your face visual, if you would like to unmute your or mute your camera. But today we have four amazing panelists, and they have been in child welfare combined years of maybe 70 years. And so they come today with a wealth of knowledge in child welfare. And so we ask that you take everything in that they bring to us today. If you have any questions or comments or would like to respond, please use the chat box to do so, and we will closely monitor the chat box. Today, we want to also, in honor and observation of National Child Prevention Child Abuse Month, we are hosting this final program. And so I would like to turn it over now to our amazing student, who's a grad student, Michelle Moss, to introduce our panelists this morning. And Michelle and I will co-moderate this discussion. And so we ask that you take it in, you ask questions, use the chat box, and we want this to be a very interacting session. And so, Michelle, I turn the virtual mic over to you.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to have you here. I am excited to announce our panelists for the day. First, we have Maribeth Bowman. She is the forensic interviewer at the Shelby County Children's Advocacy Center in Columbiana. As the forensic interviewer, Maribeth has provided over 2,000 interviews for local, state, and federal level agencies. And she provides court testimonies and professional consultation regarding the dynamics of child abuse. Maribeth has the honor of serving on multiple teams in task force, coordinating the Birmingham Area Forensic Interviewer Peer Review Group. She facilitates the interview practicum day for the National Children's Advocacy Center. She is also an adjunct instructor for the University of Alabama School of Social Work, and she provides supervision to interns at local universities. We're excited to have Maribeth. Our next panelist is Christy Holt. She is the Title IV Coordinator and Training Specialist with the University of Alabama School of Social Work. As the coordinator, she oversees the Title IV stipend program for 16 social work programs within the state of Alabama, providing ongoing training for child welfare workers and administrators, educating and preparing students for a career in public child welfare. She also hosts a variety of workshops and conferences. Prior to joining the UA School of Social Work, she spent 21 years employed with DHR. During her time in the public child welfare, she worked with children and adult clients, especially in the areas of foster care, child protection and crisis intervention, resource development for the local counties, and new employee training, as well as ongoing training for frontline workers and supervisors. We're excited to have Kristy here. Our next panelist is Quinchele King. Quinchele is a Doctor of Social Work scholar at the University of Alabama in the 2023 cohort, and a social services trainer in training and professional development with Georgia's Division of Family and Children's Services. Congratulations, Quinchele. She has worked in child welfare for 10 years, serving in roles such as case manager, supervisor, field practice specialist, practice model coach, and she is now a trainer to new and veteran staff throughout the agency. She received her Master's of Social Work from Clark Atlanta University, where her thesis was on self-care, impact on compassion fatigue, and retention of Black social service professionals. As a trainer and a workshop facilitator, she has trained in the areas of Georgia's Child Welfare Simulation, Georgia's Child Welfare Academy for New Employees, solution-based casework, and she has facilitated county and regional trainings and self-care workshops throughout child welfare agencies. Welcome, Quinchele. And our final panelist is Ginger Mcgoy. Ginger graduated from Alabama with her BSW in 2000 and from Alabama in 2007 with her MSW. She has been employed with DHR since June of 2000. In that time, she has worked as a foster care worker, permanency worker, resource trainer. She has supervised investigations, intakes, home studies, and adult protective services. She also served as the juvenile court liaison between Tuscaloosa DHR and the Tuscaloosa Juvenile Court. Ginger became the program supervisor in Tuscaloosa County, supervising frontline service supervisors. And after 17 and a half years here in Tuscaloosa, she transferred to Walker County DHR and now supervises all of the service units. Overall, Ginger has worked for 20 and a half years in DHR. We're excited to have all of these panelists here today.
Thank you, Michelle, for such a warm introduction of our esteemed panelists. And so we will get started with our first question. And to the panelists, whichever you would like to answer first, tell us your why. Why did you choose social work, particularly in the field of child welfare?
Well, I guess since I unmuted first. So social work social work in child welfare sort of chose me. Working in child welfare had always been one of those things that I considered doing. And next thing I know, I ended up here. So I said, oh, I'm working child welfare. I'm going to be here for like 2 years. And I'm coming up on 10 years. And it's been a great journey. And my why behind it is because for me, working with not only children, typically when we think of child welfare, we think of the children. But for me, it is the family unit, working with the mother, the father, the relatives to keep the family unit together. My time in child welfare the majority of my focus was in family preservation, preserving the family in the home unit. So that is my biggest passion, is to decrease the number of children in foster care. And I can say that is something I really focused on in coming into child welfare. Is not just the child, but the entire family unit.
Yeah, I'll go next. So I think kind of like Quinchele was saying that it kind of finds you. And I think when child welfare, once you get in it, it's hard to get out of it because you gain such a passion for it. And I always knew when I went into social work, I wanted to do something that involved the legal system. I wanted to be a forensic social worker. And so I did an internship at the public defender's office. And then I did an internship at another children's advocacy center. And it was through that advocacy center model of the team members all working together to address allegations of abuse that really, to me, it ended up like it was a beautiful thing. So it reminded me of a symphony, and when all of the different players are playing the same note together in harmony, like it creates beauty for me, and it still gives me goosebumps when I talk about it, because when you see these children who come in varying levels of abuse, whatever that may be, and then you're able to be the microphone and the megaphone for them, and
with their hands a lot.
And it's really, to me, it's a beautiful thing, and I find it an honor that kids choose me to be the person that they tell their deepest, darkest secrets to. And so for me, that's what really compelled me to continue on in child welfare and doing that. And I think the why, especially with social work, is there's so many different ways and fields that we can go into. And even with being in child welfare and forensic social work, like what I do with being objective and having that training as a social worker, it's really easy for me to stay objective. And so when I do my forensic interviews, I go in there and I hear their story. And not only is it to address possible abuse that's happened, but it's also to maybe exonerate someone who is maybe inadvertently accused of something or accidentally accused of something. And so it's actually we're not just playing just on the child welfare side, it's for the entire family, not just for that child. And I think my why of it is, for me, every kid has a right to grow up free from trauma and from abuse. And so if I can help prevent that from one child and one family in one case, I'm going to do whatever I can to be able to do that.
So I don't have a beautiful how I ended up here story. I told the other panelists that a little bit ago. I'm not real sure how I ended up a social worker, but I did, and I'm glad I did. I think with the department, though, I really identify with our mission statement, which is to provide for the protection, well-being, and self-sufficiency of children and adults. And once I started in child welfare, I can't imagine doing anything else, even on the worst days. It's where I want to be. I believe in what we do at DHR, our mission, and what we're set out to do. We're a system that needs work, as any other systems do, but it takes those of us willing to do the work. So glad to be here.
And I would just say, for my why, I really kind of stumbled into social work. That wasn't necessarily where I had thought I would start out. In fact, I started out on the other side of campus, to be honest. And I just stumbled into the field of social work largely through some work with a nonprofit. And I just saw kids that were hurting. And for me, these were life experiences that I was very naive to. And so obviously there's the social worker in me that's like, I want to save the world. So I set out to save the world, and I just discovered I had to do it one child at a time. And so I took 21 years to help as many as I could, and then I had to change routes. So that's kind of my why.
Thank you so much, our panelists, for sharing your why. Beautiful whys. And I heard most of you say that you stumbled upon, and I just really believe that your purpose met your passion, or your passion met your purpose. You are predestined to be at that place, because we need social workers, good social workers such as yourself, to be in this profession, to make sure that all of our children have the right, as Maribeth said, the right to be free from trauma. So thank you for your work. And I will pass the mic over to Michelle for the second question.
Those were such interesting answers. I enjoyed that and hearing more about each of you. So our next question is, what can social workers do to dispel the myth that social workers only take babies from homes, that our goal is to remove children from their families?
Well, for me, one of the things that I do often is I speak about social work, and I speak about what we do in the different levels of social work and how we play an integral part in not only being therapists, because a lot of people do think you're either taking kids or you're a therapist. And so I talk about all the in between, especially when we're talking about macro level social work, the policy side of it. So for me, the way I dispel the myth is continuously having these conversations with those who are undergraduates or just people in the community. So for me, I remember when I first started working in child welfare, I used to be afraid to tell people that I worked in child welfare for the fear that, oh, you take kids. And I had people say that. But I take those opportunities to educate people, to talk with people about why is that your perception? What is going on, or what has happened, or what do you see? And of course, even on TV, when we talk about social workers, we often see social work only in the position of child welfare. So although I love child welfare, and this is where I am as far as my career is concerned, I think looking at the wide variety of social workers and what we have to offer is very important for the field of social work, because we can't just think in isolation. We'll have the world thinking in isolation in regards to social work. And will I remain in social work for 20, 30 years? Who knows? But as of right now, this is where my passion sit. And this is what I will continue to do, even if I move out of child welfare. This is what I do. I talk all the time. I have a group of social workers that is about 600 people in a group me. It's a little over 600 people. So I'm constantly having these conversations about social work, because even with them sometimes it's like, oh, I only can work in child welfare. And I'm like, if that's not where you want to be, let me be honest, I don't want you here. Because the work that we do is so important. We work with humans. We work with humans that have a multitude of challenges, of trauma. And if this isn't where you want to be, I tell people, even new case managers who come into the agency training, don't be here, because you're not going to serve anyone, thinking that this is not where you want to be. So then I talk with them about, let's talk about what do you want to do in social work. So I don't want them like, oh, you told me to get out and now it's nothing. But I think it's important for us to continue to hold space for these conversations and challenge others.
Yeah, and I think having those conversations around the myth like she was talking about, I think that's really important. And so I hold a lot of conversations about that and talking to undergraduate students. And when we're having those conversations, one thing I like to tell people is no one's going to know your successes, but everyone's going to know your failures. And a lot of times when social work is put into the media, it's when something has gotten to maybe the court level where it's unsealed documents that people have access to. And so they're going to hear about those outlier cases where something has happened. They're not going to hear about the 3,000 children you saved from an unsafe environment. They're not going to hear about that. They're going to hear about those negative stories, and not just to listen to what the media is telling you about what the field of social work is, to look at the people, look to the people, look to our founders and what that mission of social work is and the people that we work to. And I think, with our clients, when we come in, it's really, I think, me being not the actual CAN worker or family pres worker, I think that's helpful for me to be able to even advocate for my team members, to say, your team members, your social worker, she's there to ensure safety of your kids. She's a partner for you, a partner in safety for your child. How can we work together as a team to ensure that your child is safe and that your child maintains safety? And so a lot of what I do is have those conversations with the parent to then advocate, because I'm not advocating just for the child and for their family, but also for those team members, to then maybe help bring down some of those walls that people might have because of those preconceived notions. So a lot of what I have is, okay, let's all partner together. How are we going to partner together in this? And so that's really how I try to dispel those myths, is by modeling and then having those kind of uncomfortable conversations.
So I think I've probably worked a lot in my career to dispel the myth that we're baby snatchers. We assess safety and we assess protective capacity of caregivers. If a child needs to be removed, DHR is the authority to do that. There's one in every county, and that's our job. But we don't do it alone. There's a team. We can't do it alone. It's DHR, law enforcement, the court system. When Maribeth talked about the media, we can't talk about what we do. We can't, we're lame ducks. People can blast us all over any kind of media that they want to, and we don't get to say a word. And that's hard as a human. And it's hard when you work or when you feel so passionate about what you do and you have to remain quiet. But we don't always just remove kids. There are other options. There are safety plans where the parents remain in control and can make safe plans for their kids. A lot of times they don't want to do that for whatever reason. So then we have to get court intervention. There's all kinds of other service provision we would try to put in place before we remove children. So I try to shift that narrative when talking to young professionals or people outside of DHR, where, we're not just sitting around with catcher's mitts waiting to go to the hospital and catch a baby. There's a lot that goes into it. that people don't see and you don't hear in the media, but it's there. It's a lot of hard work. And again, it's not just a DHR decision. It's attorneys, judges, law enforcement, everyone.
I think the way that I try to dispel the myth is, obviously I'm not in Ginger's position anymore at the department. So in my role at the School of Social Work is educating students. And in teaching child welfare and the intro to child welfare course, I get students from all kinds of majors because it's a free elective for a lot of other degrees. And I'm always fascinated by the people that choose to take the intro to child welfare course that are theater majors or journalism majors or poli-sci majors. And the psychology, I kind of can get that, but some of the others, I'm just like, why? Why did you choose this course? But I take it as an opportunity for me to kind of get that ripple effect going of educating non-social workers in what social work does. And I warn them the first day of class, I said, I'm going to teach this class as if every one of you want to be a child welfare worker. So I'm going to expect you to think like a child welfare worker. And for some of them, that's difficult. We spend a good bit of time in that class talking about all the different aspects of the department. And I really try to focus a lot on family preservation, and that the removal of children truly is the last resort. Ginger mentioned, we're assessing safety. We're only going to remove kids when they're not safe. And so for a lot of people, they don't understand, my students particularly, don't understand what those other options are. And so we talk about, I talk about kinship care, I talk about family preservation and safety plans and wraparound services and all that we put into it. And I tell them, when you leave the university and you go practice law or you go write policy for somebody, just remember that you also are responsible for the children in your community. And so, I put the responsibility on them to be able to report. We talk about mandated reporting. I really try to educate them around it's all of our responsibility to take care of these kids. It's not just DHR and DHR alone.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Kristy, Maribeth, and Ginger and Quinchele for those great responses. And as Kristy stated, children are only removed when they are unsafe. And it's all about reunification, when there's a plan. And so the next question, and it's a question particularly geared towards students. What are some recommendations for students who may be interested in child welfare? Any recommendations, any tips that you can probably give students who may be interested in child welfare?
Well, I'll go first on that one. Anybody in Alabama that's interested in child welfare as a student, come see me. I want to talk to you about our stipend program. I want to talk to you about our coaching program. I want to talk to you about all that we're trying to do to help you be successful as a child welfare worker. I also really encourage them to talk to current child welfare workers. And I said, if you don't know anybody, come see me. I know lots of them, and they will be glad to talk to you about the reality. We've created PSAs. We've created some realistic job interview media that they can look at to get an idea of what child welfare is like. I encourage them truly to do as much exploration in terms of all the classes that they can take through the schools of social work or even like criminal justice, some of those, because the last thing I want, and I think this was mentioned earlier, if you're not right for the position, then you don't benefit the department by dabbling in it and then bailing. And so I really want, I don't want, I've had students come back to me and say, I didn't know it would be like that. I don't ever want to hear that again. So I want to do as much prep work as we can before they ever get to DHR. Obviously, I'm going to strongly recommend they do an internship with the department. maybe 2 or 3, maybe an undergraduate and a graduate level, just for the exposure and the opportunity to be trained by people that are in the field doing the work.
Yeah. And I would say come to the dark side. We have cookies in juice boxes. That's what I tell them all. Like, you're never going to be without a snack. But really, in reality, what I tell students when they contact me and want to talk to me about being, in child welfare or in the CAC world, what, I tell them is about the internships. And I think from my perspective, working at Children's Advocacy Center, I think it's I for one think we're the best journalist practice because you get micro, meso, and macro level social work through a CAC. You see all different kinds of social workers. You get to work really closely with other child welfare workers as they investigate their cases. And so I think that doing internships and I always advocate for internships at DHR and with my students about working at DHR and the benefits that are behind that. And I feel like once you get into DHR, it's that kind of gives a lot of people that groundwork. You learn such great skills working at DHR that really fuel you for the rest of your career. You learn quick assessment skills. You learn crisis intervention. You learn counseling when you're talking these parents down and you're really working with these families. And so I really think that sometimes it's an undervalued position, but I feel like it's so important and the skills that you learn are so great. And one thing I also tell my students who are interested in going into child welfare is to really work on your assessment and your questioning skills and how you assess and how you come across, and whether the way, and to really think about when you're working on your assessments and learning more about assessment styles is, am I giving energy to my client or am I taking energy away from my client? Is the way that I'm assessing, is the way that I'm interacting with this family, is it giving them energy or taking energy away from them? And really working on that and kind of incorporating that into how you work, because a lot of, in child welfare, it's a lot of assessments, it's a lot of question asking, it's a lot of investigation type stuff on my side of it. And so really working on and honing those skills. But I think that it all comes down to, am I giving or taking energy away from my client?
For me, I would say talking with people. I know, for some I agree with Kristy, the internship part, and Maribeth. But I also think just talking with someone who's new to the field and someone who's been in the field for a while and it had held many different positions is definitely beneficial. Because as much as I love child welfare, there are parts of child welfare that most people cannot handle. And in all honesty, the part that people cannot handle is the inside political aspect of child welfare. So knowing and understanding all the parts of child welfare, understanding the deep, dark parts aren't really the children that have experienced abuse sometimes. Sometimes the deep, dark part is, how do you learn to manage and cope with different styles of leadership? So knowing all of that. So for me, I'm pretty transparent when I'm talking with people because I want them to know everything. Is it going to be easy every day? No. Is that the same? Is that the case with every career choice that we make in social work? No. But what are the good parts? How do you manage that? Is definitely important for me to make sure that I'm having those conversations with people. And for some reason, even my work email, I get hey, I heard that you're a person to talk to and I'm interested in child welfare. And so when that happened, I make sure that I answer all their questions, but I make sure they understand every piece of child welfare. And the fact that, like all the panelists have stated, we do not work alone. If you do not like working with others, it's already an automatic no for you, because you have to work with other people. We have to work with law enforcement. We have to work with the courts. We have to work with community providers. And most importantly, we have to work with our relatives and our kinship people for reunification or to keep a child out of foster care, which is my platform. I want less kids in foster care than we have across the U.S. So.
I think recommendations for students is, to talk to folks that are in the field, also to understand that you're not going to know everything about child welfare quickly. I mean, I'm at almost 21 years and I learn stuff every day, probably every hour. And it's an ever-changing, fluid field. What works with one family may not work with another. Keeping expectations not low, but I don't come to work every day expecting warm fuzzies and to get, that kind of, it's not about me when I'm at work, I suppose is a better way to put that. It's helping others. And there's so many facets to what we do. Explaining what all goes on in the child welfare world, could take forever. And I think a lot of our newer staff and what I've seen are workers who want their day to finish at the end of a day and it to be done. Well, that doesn't happen working with humans. So having realistic expectations and goals of what the job is going to be. And, people aren't really happy to see us in child welfare all the time. So finding other ways to meet our own needs is really important to be successful at this job. But really chatting with folks who do the work is probably the best way to figure out if it's really something that you want to do and handle.
And I think everyone has a good point about everyone made a good point about working with the team and working with people. And a lot of times with students, what you notice is they'll say, I want to work with kids, I don't want to work with adults, or I want to work with adults, I don't want to work with kids. But in child welfare, where there's a child, there's an adult. You're not going to have a child in absence of an adult because someone has custody of that child. So whether it's a worker, a family member, a parent, a caregiver. And so when you're taking your classes, HBSC, all of these other psychopathology, all of those, pay attention to all of it, because especially if you want to work with children and in a child welfare setting, there's always going to be an adult. And it's just as important to hone your skills with adults as it is with working with children. Because especially like with our CAN workers that I work with, they maybe see the child once or twice when they do like their first victim contact and they're interviewing the child, but the rest of the time it's working with an adult and ensuring safety for that child. So really, as you're in school, don't focus so much on, I only want to work with children. Take into everything, because that kid's a part of a system and you need to understand that system and how they all interact together.
And I would like to add one way to know and understand is, yes, it's great talking with us, but if there are families or children that have had interaction with child welfare on that side of it, those voices are bigger than my voice, because their experiences is what they've experienced. And so it can be negative and sometimes it's positive. But when you hear those stories, it lets you know if you can make a difference. And I know for me, and I forgot to mention this earlier, part of my why is that I did contract work for child welfare. But I heard all the negative things about the case managers, and it actually made me want to be a great case manager. It made me want to be that person that would sit down and talk with the family and work with the child on the different issues and everything. So being on the outside, I was able to hear the stories from the mother, from the father, from the aunt, the grandmother, and the child, and what their experiences were like. And it made me want to say, you know what? I think I can make a difference over there at that child welfare agency.
Thank you so much. Before Michelle present the last question, we have a question from the chat, and this is to all of our esteemed panelists. I would like to know, and this is from Archie, I would like to know from each of the speakers, one thing you think is most important to remember throughout your career.
Okay, I can hit that one. I think the one thing that I would say as a social worker, and in particular as a child welfare worker, is for you to always remember that you're just I'm just a couple of paychecks away from being on the other side of the glass in the lobby at DHR. It can be any of us. And if you keep it in perspective, that it's just grace that has me on this side rather than that side, keeping that perspective that, I am not that different from my clients. You really do. You begin to look at your work as you apply the get to where your client is, and you can see things through a different perspective. That's the lens that I like to practice from, is realizing that we're not that different, and I'm not that far away or that far removed from being a client. It could be me.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, for me, it's always to remember that your client is more than the first page of their file, that they come to you with a load of experience, and they come to you with past trauma, generational trauma, their interactions. And so your client is always more than the first page of their file, and always take time to learn who that person is and to address their humanity and about the experiences, and come to them with a level of respect. And so for me, especially when you get repeat clients and clients who don't necessarily listen to the advice that you give them, to remember that there's more there than just that first page of the file. And when I keep that in perspective, the work with my clients is deeper, because I'm remembering it's not just what we see on the outside, that there's so much more, and that it's for us to continuously address that other part of them, not just what we see from their case file.
What I was going to say when I talk to my students in terms of what do I want them to remember, I want them to remember that they're getting a degree, not a crystal ball. And we don't always have all the information. That as social workers, we make the most informed, the most educated, the most founded and grounded decision about children and families that we can, based on what we have. But we don't always get all the information. And so remembering that we're human, that sometimes we make mistakes, sometimes we didn't ask all the right questions, and we don't always make the right decisions. And that I don't want to say that that's okay, but we are human and we are going to make mistakes. And so I think sometimes, at least from my students' perspective, it's very overwhelming, all the decisions and the information that we have to process. And so I try to help them remember, we do it as a team. There'll be people helping you, but you don't have a crystal ball, and we're not always going to make the right decisions.
My piece of advice is something that I have stated many times. I talk to people about, and I actually facilitate workshops on, is self-care and the importance of it. I feel like in social work, especially through the education piece, we do not talk about it enough. You cannot take care of anyone else if you're not being taken care of. My thoughts on everything, and the reason why I chose self-care, because I would see a lot of, well, they're gone, so we're going to just, put someone else in their position, another body. So at the end of the day, take care of yourself. Make sure that you're okay. If you're not okay and you don't know how to compartmentalize what's going on with you, it's going to be hard to service other people. So don't put it in a compartment, leave it there in the little box, and don't come back to it. Make sure you're always, you have someone to talk to, no matter which field of social work that you're in. Have a colleague that you can talk to about what's going on. Take time for yourself. Mental health days are real. I have scheduled 2 weeks off in July just because I have no vacation going on during that time. I'm just off because I was like, I need 2 weeks of mental health. Luckily, because I work in child welfare for the state of Georgia, I also have about 10 months of leave that is untouched. So me taking off 2 weeks and doing nothing does nothing with touching my leave. But what it does is it rejuvenates me, and it helps my mental health, because I have to make sure that I'm okay. So I want you to make sure that you're okay. Because if you're not okay, trust me, it's going to be hard to make sure that children and families are okay. It's going to be quite difficult. So that's my message. Of course, the message that all the other panelists have stated, but that one is my thing that I drive home, because you cannot do this work, no matter which part of social work you're in, if you're not well.
Mm-hmm.
So that really leads into our next question beautifully. And the last question is, and I think several of you have already touched on it already. What can you do for, or what can you recommend for professionals, specifically in child welfare, to prevent compassion fatigue or burnout, or for people who are already experiencing that? What can you recommend for them?
I think first we have to really be able to recognize compassion fatigue, educate ourselves. Sometimes seeing it in yourself is difficult, but to really understand what compassion fatigue is, to understand vicarious trauma, and to realize that we're not those superheroes that we'd like to think we are, and that sometimes our family and friends make us out to be, and that we can really experience those things. And then you have to dig within and figure out what works for you, because what my self-care plan looks like may not be yours. And figuring out how to implement that. I think taking time off, we get caught up, and I'm guilty as a manager of looking at the workloads and what's due and thinking about things on a pretty narrow scope, rather than thinking about the holistic approach of a person, of my workers, of what they have going on in their lives, rather than just what we've got to get done here at work. So approaching our employees, our coworkers, more holistically, and actually seeing and valuing their needs as potentially greater than what all else we have to get done, because we do have to be healthy to get those things done and to make adequate assessments, and take care of ourselves. So it's educating us and the reality that we're not those superhumans too.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
So I would say, again, having, your people that you talk to, having those mental health days, checking in with yourself. And like Ginger stated, it's great when everyone else around you know what compassion fatigue is and burnout and know how to recognize it. As a supervisor, that was one of my biggest things with my case managers, was when I would see compassion fatigue starting to creep in, I would tell them it's time to take a mental health day. And on their mental health day, I would say, listen, no computer at home, no work cell at home. I would literally check at the end of the day and make sure that it was on their desk to make sure that they were okay. And when you take care of others, others take care of you. So once I was able to start seeing those things, they would say, okay, Quinchele, listen, compassion fatigue is starting to creep in for you. It's time for you as our supervisor to take a mental health day. And so I would say, okay, you're right. You know what? My computer is going to be in my office and my phone. But it is having that community and having those people around you who you can talk to, having those circle of people. It is very important to the work that we do, because sometimes I just need to vent. And that is okay. And then I might not be able to take a day off, but because I was able to release. And with the work that we do and the confidentiality of what we do in child welfare, you have to have someone that you can talk to about these things. So my whole thing is mental health days, Have someone that you can talk to, and being able to recognize the signs within yourself. So, and the fourth thing, which is a bonus, have a therapist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing that I do with my interns when they come in is what my clinical supervisor did for me when I was in supervision. Is there's something called the ProQual, which you can get free on the internet. It's just PROQOL. And what it does is you take it as a scale, and then it actually scales and it adds up for your compassion, satisfaction, secondary traumatic stress, and compassion fatigue. And every week for supervision, I have my interns fill that out, and then we talk about it. And you're able, for me, when I was in supervision, I actually tracked that over the 2 years to see the ebbs and flows of that. And when I saw that it had, when it was raised up, okay, this is when it's time to really start putting in that extra self-care. And so I do that with my interns so that they can begin to see that in themselves and check that in themselves. And after a while, you're able to kind of tell, okay, I think my profile would be kind of high this week. What do I need to do? And so that was really important for me when I was in, I didn't like it when I was in supervision, but, and Dr. Nelson Gardell will tell you that, but in the long run, it was so important for me in being able to do that and then being able to pass that on to my interns. And I would also second having a group and a team. Research shows that when you work as a part of a team, that your compassion, satisfaction, and your self-care is actually higher. And I think there is that we're all in the foxhole together, and being able to vent and like being able to go to your team and say, this day sucks because, and then just being able to vent it in a way that is non-judgmental, in a way that you can maybe have some of those difficult conversations that you can't talk to your client about, or you can't talk to your family about, but to be able to say, today I don't like my client because this is going on, and someone who's going to listen to you and validate those feelings, but then also help you reconcile with yourself about those feelings so that you can still serve your clients in a way that in a healthy manner. And so I'm really big on self-care too, about having that. I like to laugh, and I think because we have such heavy jobs, to do things that make me laugh. So I volunteer at a sheep farm, which is funny because that's really fun because you get to play with baby sheep, and we do sheep shearing and stuff like that. And then I cross-stitch dirty words because it's that action of just doing something over and over again, and it's repetitive, and then it makes you laugh when you just these like silly things. And so I like to do things that are just completely opposite of my day-to-day that make me laugh, because I feel like, I'm teaching HBSE too, and the one thing about aging gracefully is never losing that sense of play, and I never want to lose that sense of play. And so whatever I can do to keep me playing and laughing, that's what I do. And I think that's so important for us, is to take time to laugh and to find the joy that's in the world, because we see so much negative in it.
I would just say, kind of going along the lines with what Ginger was sharing, is really educating ourselves. And I think it's so important. The field of child welfare in particular can be so draining and so consuming that we really do have to be attuned to what's going on with ourselves. So I think really knowing the difference between secondary traumatic stress or vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue and burnout, kind of those three different things. And we tend to use those words very interchangeably, but they're really not. And so really recognizing and beginning to identify those indicators of secondary traumatic stress and how we respond to that may be very different than the indicators for compassion fatigue and how we respond to that. And so I think as individuals, we really need to know ourselves. I think as supervisors or administrative leaders, we've got to be very attuned to the responsiveness that we show to our workers and our workforce and what they're dealing with, and the work environment. Is it one where they can come in and vent and get some refreshing? But it all starts with really recognizing those different phases that we might be in. And just because we're experiencing traumatic stress here, or just because we're experiencing compassion, it doesn't mean we need to get out of the field, or that we're not cut for this. It may just mean we need some some healing, and the healing could be the 2-week vacation, which sounds really neat, but it could also be literally just 10 or 15 minutes of deep breathing and kind of getting some focus back. So I think we just have to be attuned to ourselves, our bodies, and what are we saying to ourselves.
Thank you so much, Kristy, and the other panelists. And so we have another question from the chat, and it's a previous question before we start talking about self-care. And it's so important. Self-care is the best care. I love self-care. And despite being a child welfare social worker, whatever profession you're in, be it social work or whatever profession, I really encourage you to take some self-care, take some time for yourself, because a good flight attendant would say that we cannot put the mask on anyone until we have saved ourselves. Because how can we pour from an empty cup? We cannot pour from an empty cup. And as social workers and other professions, it's important that we are refilled and refueled to go back out and do the work. And so the previous question, it says, I'm a school social worker. How can I promote awareness of Child Abuse Prevention Month in our school district? And anyone can answer that question.
I like the pinwheels.
Mm-hmm.
I have on a pinwheel today, but pinwheels are definitely one of the visuals. In the county that I worked in, we had a pinwheel for every child that was in foster care. So it was representative when you would ride by and you would see the little hill to know. And then it was a sign that was simple, a very simple sign that would promote child, or, the recognizing Child Abuse Awareness Prevention Month. So that's an easy way to do it, as well as just having a conversation or having someone from your local child welfare agency to come in and speak with the teachers, the administration. And because, in child welfare, we collaborate a lot with school period, that I think that's a great way, if there's not a relationship there, but there's definitely a great way to build that relationship.
And I would say, too, link up with your local children's advocacy center. I know for us, we do a lot of things around Child Abuse Prevention Month. Like, we have a pinwheel garden for every child that's been interviewed in our county. Our Facebook page has lots of interactive things to do. And so you can definitely work with your local CAC to see what all they have going on. There's some different kind of awareness things that you can do throughout. You can have like a blue week, kind of like you have red week at school, but a blue week, painting the school blue. There's lots of things out there. And then 2, talk to your CAC about prevention measures. With the laws that are in place now, you have to have prevention education within your schools. And so look at, how is your school meeting that? How is your school doing that? With us, we do prevention programs in all of the Shelby County schools and the Pelham City schools for kindergarten through 3rd grade. We go in and every child gets prevention education and training through that. And so talking to your local CAC about those prevention measures and what are some of the things that you can put in place. But your child welfare agency and your local CAC is going to be a wealth of knowledge when it comes to that.
Thank you so much, Maribeth and Quinchele, for responding to that question. So we have one last question in the chat, and I want to focus this question or gear this question to Ginger. And it says, I wonder how you all encourage and support each needs. And excuse me for 1 minute. Let me scroll back up. It was a question related to the pandemic. Have you seen more or less cases in the midst of the pandemic?
So I can speak for my county. And I'll say early on in the pandemic, our numbers in reports went down. Children were invisible, and that was scary. And fortunately, in Walker County, our school system did a really smart thing, and they linked up with the BARC app for monitoring their at-home devices. And then we saw a mass influx because a lot of code words or target words would notify officials of kids talking about certain things. So then we got another influx of reports then. but I felt like children were less invisible because they were talking on their tablets or communicating with schools. We're a pretty rural county, so some of the teachers and school counselors, school resource officers even made a lot of home visits. They were able to actually get out into the homes more. And so we got, our kids became less invisible. I don't know about other counties so much. I don't think the trend across the state has been that many fewer reports. I think it's stayed pretty consistent. I think all of us are bracing for what the after effects of the pandemic will be on child welfare and just mental health as a whole with our kids and the population we serve.
Thank you, Ginger. And for this, yes, okay, Quinchele, yes.
I was about to say the trend that we've noticed, unfortunately, in the state of Georgia is that our assessments of safety has decreased because we are not in the homes 100% like we were previously. So that is a federal issue as well as a state issue that we're having, and a safety issue of maintaining safety, permanence, and well-being. So it's a little hard to do in the pandemic in an extensive manner as we did before.
And I can follow up with that a little bit in that we didn't change how we entered the home child welfare wise. We have operated business as usual. Our workers weren't in the office. They were working remotely, but as far as making contacts, assessing safety, all of that has remained the same. So if you see a DHR worker from Alabama, give them a fist bump and a thank you, because they were out there. We weren't recognized as first responders. I may be a little salty about that, but they were out there going into homes, putting their own health on the line and doing things that a lot of other folks weren't doing, and some weren't having to do. And without any of the recognition, which that's typical for us as social workers, again, I will let my saltiness stop with that.
Thank you so much, Ginger and Quinchele and Kristy and Maribeth. And a special thanks to Michelle for co-moderating this session with me. Michelle is graduating in another couple of months, and we have another social worker who will be in the field. So thank you for this amazing conversation today. And now I would like to turn it over to Peggy Swells about how you can earn your CEU for today.
Thank you, Sharon. And again, thank you, panelists. What a wonderful presentation. So I'm the Continuing Education Coordinator with the School of Social Work, and this qualifies for 1 CEU. So we'll be sending out an email. You should get that tomorrow. And along with the CEU is a program evaluation. And so we appreciate any feedback you can offer. And maybe I'll just mention while Sharon's on here, she kind of alluded to it earlier, but we're going to start offering this the next academic year as well. Like, we'll have a Noontime Knowledge once per month. We've just really received a lot of great support. So thanks to Sharon for kicking this off for us. And again, thanks for everybody for coming. Okay, back to you.
Thank you so much, Peggy. And again, thank you for joining Noontime Knowledge. And as Peggy stated, you will hear more from us and about our upcoming events, the 2021-2022. Thank you, panelists. And I think our one of our associate deans is still on, Daphne Kane. Daphne, are you on? If so, will you unmute to close us out? Again, thank you for taking time away from your busy schedules. And if you are a social worker, particularly in child welfare, your work matters. You matter. I mean, despite the fact how you may feel when you go home, you may not be able to talk about it, but the role that you play in the lives of our children and communities and families, your work is very vital and you matter. Daphne?
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for the Noontime Knowledge. This has been just so wonderful. I've attended a number of these, and it's been fantastic. I'd like to thank Michelle Moss and Sharon for being our facilitators and our great panelists, Maribeth Parker Bowman, Ginger McGaughy, Quinchele King, and Christy Holt. Thank you so much for providing us with your expertise. I'd also like to thank Peggy Swells for facilitating CEUs for all of these programs. child welfare in particular in social work, we can get burned out, and sometimes we lose our humanity when we feel burned out. But what I got from this today was the deep level of compassion and empathy of the child welfare workers that presented here today. And so that gives me a great deal of hope. So thank you so much.